We are going to keep searching. That's our job right now, and no one's stopping. We have lots of officers here on the scene that are parents themselves, and we can certainly feel for this family, and our priority is to bring these kids home safe.
They stopped searching on day 8, not because they found something, not because the families asked them to. They stopped because the experts told them what nobody wanted to hear. The weather, the time, the ages, the math didn't work anymore. You know that feeling when you're searching for your phone, and you retrace your steps one more time, even though you know it's pointless? That desperate loop your brain does where logic says stop, but your heart won't let you? Now imagine that feeling. Except what you're searching for is your children. And the woods are so thick the helicopters can't see through the canopy. And there's no cell signal, so you can't even call their names and hope they'll hear a ringtone. And the water you're wading through is up to your waist, and it's been raining for days. Daniel Martel ran through those woods screaming until his throat bled. Then military personnel told him he couldn't go back in. His own children were somewhere in 47 square kilometers of dense Nova Scotia wilderness, and he had to wait for permission to search for them. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. At what exact moment does hope become cruelty? When you stop telling a father his kids might still be alive. 2-second pause. Because 8 days after Jack and Lily Sullivan walked into those woods near Gearlock Road in Lancedone Station, Staff Sergeant Robert McCammon stood in front of cameras and said the words that change everything. The likelihood that they're alive right now is very low. Very low. Not zero. Just very low. Which means the search doesn't end. It just transforms into something nobody wants to name. If you've ever loved someone enough that the thought of losing them makes your chest physically hurt, you're in the right place. This isn't just about 2 missing children. It's about the specific kind of torture that comes from not knowing, from searching anyway, from celebrating a birthday for a child who isn't there to blow out the candles. Subscribe, because this case will ask you questions about hope that you won't be able to stop thinking about. 7 months. That's how long it's been since anyone saw Jack and Lily Sullivan. 7 months of searching. 7 months of Facebook groups spinning conspiracy theories. 7 months of a father defending himself against accusations he won't even name out loud. 7 months of a community learning that sometimes the worst thing isn't getting bad news. It's getting no news at all. Let me take you back to the beginning, but not the beginning you expect. Lancedone Station, Nova Scotia. If you've never been there, imagine the kind of place where cell phone signals just stop working. Not spotty service, nothing. The kind of dense woods where the trees are so thick that even in daylight, the forest floor stays dim. Locals know these woods. They know the trails. They know which areas flood when it rains. They know where the terrain gets dangerous. The Sullivan siblings knew these woods too. Jack, who had just turned another year older in the 7 months since he disappeared. Except nobody knows how old he is now because that detail's been kept private. Lily, his sister, whose age we also don't know. What we do know is they were young enough that when Staff Sergeant McCammon mentioned their ages as a factor in survival likelihood, everyone understood immediately what he meant. Young children, dense wilderness, no cell signal, inclement weather, time. Those are the variables in an equation that only has one answer, and it's the answer nobody wants. But here's the first thing that doesn't make sense. This is not being treated as a criminal investigation. The RCMP's Major Crimes Unit is involved. Read that again. Major Crimes Unit. Involved. But not a criminal investigation. The RCMP won't explain why. That decision, to involve major crimes but not call it criminal, has created a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. The internet absolutely despises one. Within days of the disappearance, Facebook groups started multiplying like bacteria. Theories, accusations, misinformation is the polite word the RCMP used. What they meant was, people were accusing Daniel Martel of killing his own children. Let me be very clear about something. Daniel Martel was asked directly if he had anything to do with the disappearance of Lily and Jack. His answer, I 100% did not, and I will hold that till my last day on this planet. He shouldn't have had to say that. But when there's no information, people create it. When there's no villain in the story, they cast one. And the father's searching until his throat bleeds become suspicious simply because someone has to be. Here's what we know happened that Friday morning. It's not much. It's barely anything. And that's exactly the problem. Jack and Lily went into the woods near Gearlock Road. Dense woods. Remote woods. The kind of woods where if you're looking for someone, you're not just fighting visibility. You're fighting terrain that actively resists searching. Thick underbrush. Flooding from recent rain. No clear sight lines. The kind of place where you could walk within 20 feet of someone and never see them. Within hours of the children being reported missing, people responded. Over 120 people showed up that first weekend. Not police officers. People. Neighbors. Strangers. People who didn't know Jack and Lily, but knew what it meant that they were missing. Daniel Martel was ahead of the helicopters, ahead of the drones, screaming loud as he could until his throat hurt, running through water that was waist-deep, and then he was stopped. Someone in military attire told him he couldn't go back into the woods. Imagine that. Imagine being told you can't search for your own children. Imagine having to stand outside the forest knowing they're somewhere in there, or were, while trained personnel do the searching for you. Imagine trusting that they'll look in the exact places you would look, call out the exact names you would call, feel the exact urgency you feel. You can't. You'd go insane. Daniel probably did, a little. That's not judgment. That's just truth. Your children disappear into woods behind your home, and you're not allowed to search for them. Your brain would break. The first weekend, hope was possible. Children get lost. Children get found. It happens. Lancetone Station was operating under the assumption that this was a search and rescue operation. Find the kids, bring them home. Everyone cries with relief, and there's a happy ending. Then the days started stacking up. Day 2, Day 3, Day 4. Rain kept falling. The temperatures at night were cold, not freezing, but cold enough that hypothermia becomes a real concern, especially for children. Especially for young children who might not know how to find shelter or stay dry or conserve body heat. Day 5, Day 6, Day 7. The RCMP brought in experts, search and rescue specialists, people who understand survival statistics, people who know how long humans can last without water, about 3 days. Without food, much longer, but exposure and injury complicate things. People who factor in age, weather conditions, terrain difficulty, and something nobody wants to say out loud, the possibility of trauma. On Day 8, May 7th, the press conference happened. The reporter driving down that morning knew something was coming. You don't call a press conference a week into a missing children case unless you're announcing one of two things. We found something, or we're stopping. He knew which one it was before Staff Sergeant McCammon even opened his mouth. As of today, May 7th, the active search efforts to locate Lily and Jack will be scaled back. Scale back, not ended. Scale back, which means fewer people, less intensity. A shift from rescue operation to something else. Recovery operation, maybe. Cold case, potentially. Unsolved mystery, worst case scenario. And then came the sentence that broke the community. Based on the experts and the review of the facts, the inclement weather, the time frames, and their age, the likelihood that they're alive right now is very low. Very low, not impossible. Just very, very unlikely, which means hope is still technically alive, but it's on life support, which might actually be worse than no hope at all, because now families have to decide, do we keep hoping, or do we start grieving? How do you bury children you haven't found? How do you move forward when there's no body, no closure, no final moment that lets you say, this is over? You don't. You exist in a state of suspended animation where every phone call could be the one. Every time someone knocks on the door, it could be news. Every time you see a story about remains being found somewhere, you wonder if today is the day you finally know. 7 months later, they're still wondering. Let me tell you about the community response, because this is where the story gets complicated in ways that matter. Within hours of the disappearance, people mobilized. Over 120 searchers that first weekend. People brought ATVs, drones, search dogs. They coordinated through Facebook groups and text chains. They divided up grid sections and walked shoulder to shoulder through underbrush. These weren't trained professionals. These were neighbors, parents, people who understood that if this happened to their child, they'd want an army out there searching. And they searched hard, for days, for weeks. Long after the RCMP scaled back operations, volunteers were still going out, still walking the woods, still hoping they'd be the one to find something, anything, that would bring answers. But something else was happening simultaneously in those Facebook groups. Theories were emerging, not the helpful kind, the dark kind. Why isn't this a criminal investigation if major crimes is involved? Why did Daniel Martel get stopped from searching? What was he doing the morning the kids disappeared? Why are we hearing more information from the RCMP? These are reasonable questions. But reasonable questions in an information vacuum become accusations. And accusations in a grieving community become poison. Daniel Martel started seeing his name attached to speculation he couldn't defend against because it wasn't based on facts. It was based on suspicion. The suspicion that comes when a story doesn't make sense, and people need it to make sense. So they create a narrative that does. Father, missing children, no bodies found, limited information. Therefore, father did something. It's a logical leap that isn't logical at all, but it feels logical. It has the shape of logic. And in the absence of truth, shape is enough. The RCMP addressed this at one point. With respect to the spread of misinformation, inaccurate information, and speculation, I just want to say that that's harmful. It's harmful to the families and communities who are trying to work their way through a traumatic event. Translation: people on the internet are accusing an innocent father of murdering his children, and it needs to stop. But it didn't stop. It never does. Because the internet doesn't need proof. It needs narrative. And a grieving father defending himself against accusations nobody will make directly is a narrative that writes itself. Here's what one reporter said that captures this perfectly. If you have a vacuum of information, unfortunately the internet will fill it. That creates two issues. One, journalists have to sift through that information and find out how much of it is relevant or not. And so, do investigators who are obviously looking for legitimate tips and information. Think about that. The RCMP is receiving tips, hundreds of tips, probably, and they have to sort through them knowing that a significant percentage are conspiracy theories, misremembered details, or outright fabrications from people who convince themselves they know what happened. Real information gets buried under manufactured information. Actual leads get lost in noise. And meanwhile, Jack and Lily are still missing. Let's talk about what's known, not what's suspected or theorized. What's actually confirmed. Jack and Lily Sullivan disappeared from near Gearlock Road in Lancedone Station, Nova Scotia, on a Friday morning. The exact date hasn't been released publicly, but based on the May 7 press conference being day 8, we can work backwards. Late April, most likely, they went into the woods. This much is certain. Nobody disputes this. What's disputed is everything that happened after. Were they alone? The RCMP has never said. Were they with someone? If so, who? What time did they enter the woods? What were they doing? Were they playing? Exploring? Running away? Chasing something? Being chased? These are basic questions that should have basic answers. The fact that we don't have them is what's driving the speculation. Because these are the kinds of details that determine whether this is a tragic accident or something worse. Here's what we know about the search operation itself. Multiple agencies were involved from the beginning. RCMP, ground search and rescue teams, helicopters, drones, search dogs, military personnel, over 120 civilian volunteers the first weekend alone. The terrain made searching difficult. Dense woods, poor visibility, no self-signal, meant coordination had to happen through alternative means. Radios probably, or runners bringing information back to a command center. Rain had been falling. The ground was wet. Water levels were elevated. When Daniel Martel described running through water that was waist-deep, he was exaggerating. The woods were partially flooded. They searched for 8 days at full intensity, then scaled back operations. They did not stop searching entirely, that's important, but they reduced the number of active searchers and shifted resources. The decision to scale back was based on expert assessment, weather conditions, time frames, the ages of the children. These are the factors survival experts use to calculate likelihood of survival. In wilderness survival scenarios, there's something called the survival window. It varies based on conditions, but for young children in cold, wet weather with no supplies, that window is very short. Days, not weeks. Once you pass that window, you're no longer searching for survivors. You're searching for remains. That's what very low means. They're searching for remains. They just can't say that directly because there's still a chance, microscopic but real, that Jack and Lily are alive somewhere. Injured, maybe, sheltered by someone, suffering from amnesia. It's possible, just very, very unlikely. Here's where the case takes a turn that matters for understanding why the community is struggling. Jack's birthday happened. We don't know which birthday. That detail is being kept private. But at some point in the 7 months since the disappearance, the day Jack was born rolled around again. The day that should have involved cake and presents, and singing, and maybe friends coming over, or a family dinner. Instead, it was a day of absence, an empty chair, a birthday celebrated for a child who wasn't there. One community member described it this way. They have this hope that they're still alive, that they can come home and celebrate their birthdays and give them toys and love. And they had to celebrate Jack's birthday without him. That's the cruelty of not knowing. You can't move forward. You can't grieve properly. You can't plan a funeral or have closure or begin healing. You exist in this horrible limbo where you're supposed to keep hoping, but hoping feels like self-delusion, and giving up hope feels like abandoning your children. So you celebrate a birthday for a child who's been missing for months. You sing happy birthday to an empty room. You light candles knowing nobody will blow them out. You do it anyway because what's the alternative? Accepting that this is a last birthday? Accepting that Jack and Lily are never coming home? You can't. The human brain wasn't designed to accept that. So you celebrate the birthday. You maintain the hope. You keep searching even though the official search has been scaled back. And you ignore the voice in your head that keeps asking, at what point does this become denial? Let me tell you about the national attention this case received, because it matters for understanding the pressure everyone involved is under. Within days of the disappearance, this wasn't just a Nova Scotia story. It was a Canadian story. Then international. News outlets picked it up. Social media amplified it. The Sullivan siblings became one of those cases that transcends local news and becomes a cultural moment. That kind of attention is a double-edged sword. On one hand, more visibility means more potential witnesses, more tips, more people watching for Jack and Lily. On the other hand, it means more pressure on the RCMP to provide updates, more scrutiny of every decision, and more fuel for conspiracy theories. One reporter described arriving at the scene that first day expecting to cover a local search and instead finding himself documenting something that had grown into what it is now, a case that would be studied, analyzed, theorized about, and remembered long after most missing children cases fade from public consciousness. Why? What is it about Jack and Lily Sullivan that captured attention when dozens of children go missing every year without this level of coverage? Part of it is the setting. Dense wilderness. No cell signal. It has a cinematic quality. It's the kind of scenario that makes people imagine themselves in that situation. What would you do if your children walked into the woods and never came out? How long would you search? At what point would you accept that they're gone? Part of it is the ambiguity. No bodies. No evidence of foul play. No clear explanation. Just two children who entered the woods and never emerged. It's a mystery with no solution, and humans are hardwired to seek solutions to mysteries. And part of it, the part nobody wants to say out loud, is the suspicion, the fact that major crimes is involved, but it's not criminal. The fact that Daniel Martel had to publicly declare his innocence. The fact that information is being withheld. All of that creates narrative tension that keeps people engaged. But here's what gets lost in that engagement. Jack and Lily are real children. Daniel Martel is a real father. The community of Lancedone Station is really traumatized. This isn't entertainment. It's tragedy. And treating it like entertainment does harm that outlasts the news cycle. The RCMP addressed this directly when they talked about misinformation being harmful to the families and communities who are trying to work their way through a traumatic event. But by the time they said that, the damage was done. The theories were already spreading. The accusations were already making their way through comment sections and Facebook groups and Reddit threads. Once that starts, you can't stop it. You can only watch it happen and hope it doesn't completely destroy the people at the center of it. Now we're 7 months out. 7 months since Jack and Lily disappeared. 7 months since Daniel Martel ran through waist-deep water screaming until his throat bled. 7 months since that Friday morning when everything changed. What's happening now? What does Day 210 look like? The official search has been scaled back, but it hasn't ended. The RCMP maintains that this is an active case. They're still accepting tips, still investigating leads, still looking for Jack and Lily. But the intensity is gone. The helicopters aren't flying daily. The 120 volunteers aren't organizing weekend grid searches. The media attention has largely moved on to newer tragedies, newer mysteries, newer cases that haven't gone cold yet. The community is left with the aftermath. People who spent weeks searching the woods now drive past those woods every day and wonder if they missed something, if they walked within feet of evidence and didn't see it. If Jack and Lily are still out there somewhere, waiting to be found, families that donated time and resources and hope are now dealing with the emotional cost of that investment. Because when you spend weeks searching for children, you bond with those children even if you never met them. You start thinking of them as yours. You imagine finding them, saving them, being a hero in a story that desperately needs one. And when you don't find them, when nobody finds them, there's a grief that comes with that. Not the same as a family's grief, but real nonetheless. The grief of failed hope, of powerlessness, of living in a community where 2 children disappeared and nobody could bring them home. Daniel Martel is still defending himself against accusations that should never have been made, still stating publicly that he had nothing to do with his children's disappearance, still dealing with the looks, the whispers, the suspicion that lingers even when there's no evidence to support it. Because that's what happens when information is withheld. When the RCMP can't or won't explain why major crimes is involved, but it's not criminal. When there's no clear narrative, people create one. And the one they create usually has a villain, and the villain is usually whoever is closest to the victims. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's predictable and devastating. Let's talk about what investigators know that we don't, because that gap is important. The RCMP is not releasing details about the exact timeline of when Jack and Lily entered the woods, whether they were alone or with someone, what they were doing or where they were going, what physical evidence, if any, has been found, why major crimes is involved, what specific factors led to the survival likelihood assessment, whether there are suspects or persons of interest, what the current investigative focus is. That's a lot of withheld information, and it's being withheld for reasons that might be valid. Protecting the investigation, protecting the family's privacy, avoiding compromising potential prosecution, but feel like stonewalling to a community desperate for answers. Here's the thing about withholding information. It only works if people trust that you have good reasons for doing it. When that trust erodes, the information vacuum becomes toxic. People stop believing you're protecting the investigation and start believing you're covering something up. That seems to be where Lancetone Station is now, not universal distrust. Plenty of people still support the RCMP's handling of the case, but enough doubt has crept in that theories are flourishing in the absence of facts. Was there an accident? Did someone hurt Jack and Lily? Did they run away? Were they taken? Did they get lost and succumb to exposure? Are they buried somewhere in those 47 square kilometers of dense woods, waiting to be found by a hiker years from now? Nobody knows. And after 7 months, the not knowing has become its own kind of trauma. Here's what haunts me about this case. At what point did this become inevitable? If Jack and Lily died of exposure in those woods, at what moment could they have been saved? Was it the first hour when they were probably still close to home? The first day when they were still within the initial search radius? Was there a moment when they were still alive, still findable, and the search teams just didn't look in the right place at the right time? Or was it always going to end this way? Were the conditions, dense woods, no cell signal, young children, bad weather, such that once they went in, they were never coming out? That's the question that probably keeps the searchers up at night. The volunteers who spent weeks in those woods. The RCMP officers who made the decision to scale back operations. Daniel Martel, who ran ahead of helicopters and drones and had to be stopped from searching by military personnel. Did they do enough? Could they have done more? At what point does "we did everything possible" become true versus a comforting lie we tell ourselves? There's no good answer to that question. But the question exists anyway, and it lives in the minds of everyone who was involved in the search. Let me tell you what this case reveals about human nature, because this is where the story becomes bigger than just Jack and Lily Sullivan. When children go missing, communities respond with immediate, overwhelming support. Over 120 people showed up that first weekend. People who didn't know the family. People who had their own lives, their own responsibilities. They showed up anyway because this is what humans do when children are in danger. We mobilize. That's beautiful. That's the best of us. But then time passes. Hope fades. The immediate crisis becomes a long-term tragedy. And slowly, that beautiful collective effort transforms into something darker. Suspicion, blame, theory crafting, the need to make sense of senselessness, even if that means accusing innocent people of unspeakable things. That's not the best of us. That's the worst. But it's just as human as the initial response. Maybe more so, because humans need stories to make sense. We need clear narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends. We need villains and heroes and justice and resolution. When reality doesn't provide those things, we manufacture them. Daniel Martel became a villain in a story he didn't write, not because there's evidence against him. There isn't any being reported, but because the story needs a villain and he's the closest candidate. Father, missing children, withheld information. In the absence of facts, that's enough. It's unjust, but it's how humans operate when faced with tragedies that don't make sense. Here's another thing this case reveals. We're not very good at living with ambiguity. We want answers. We want closure. We want to know what happened so we can file it away mentally and move on. When we don't get that, we create our own closure. We decide what probably happened and treat our theory as fact. Some people have decided Jack and Lily died of exposure and are still in those woods, undiscovered. Some people have decided something more sinister happened. Some people have decided this is a cover-up or a conspiracy or involves details that aren't being released for nefarious reasons. All of these might be wrong. One of them might be right. But we won't know unless there's a breakthrough. And after 7 months with no new information, a breakthrough seems increasingly unlikely. So we exist in the state of permanent not knowing, which is, in many ways, worse than the worst possible answer. Because at least the worst possible answer is an answer. At least it ends the wondering. Let's talk about the families, because they're living a nightmare that most of us can't imagine. I don't know the Sullivan family structure. I don't know if Daniel Martel is a single parent, or if there's a mother involved, or what the extended family situation is. Those details haven't been made public, and for good reason. These people deserve privacy in the worst moment of their lives. What we do know is that somewhere, people who love Jack and Lily are waking up every morning and immediately remembering that their children are missing. That immediate post-sleep moment where reality hasn't fully loaded yet, and then it does, and the weight crushes down again. 7 months of that. 210 mornings of waking up and remembering. 210 nights of going to bed, hoping tomorrow brings answers, and knowing it probably won't. The community member who described having to celebrate Jack's birthday without him, that quote stays with me, because it captures the impossible position these families are in. Do you celebrate? Do you acknowledge the day at all? Do you pretend everything's normal? Do you break down completely? There's no right answer. Every option is wrong, because Jack isn't there. Lily isn't there. Nothing you do will change that, but you have to do something. So you light candles and sing and pretend this is anything other than devastating. And then you do it again the next year, and the year after that. At what point do you stop marking birthdays for missing children? Or do you never stop? Do you keep marking them until you die, Just in case they come home and want to know that you remembered? These are questions nobody should have to answer. But the Sullivan family is answering them anyway, every single day. Here's what I keep coming back to. The silence. Not just the literal silence of the woods where cell phones don't work. The institutional silence. The information void. The RCMP saying this is an active investigation, and then saying nothing else for weeks, months. I understand protecting investigations. I understand not wanting to compromise potential prosecutions. I understand that families have a right to privacy, and that details shouldn't be released just to satisfy public curiosity. But at what point does withholding information cause more harm than releasing it? At what point does protecting the investigation become protecting the institution at the expense of the community? The RCMP said misinformation is harmful. They're right. But misinformation thrives in information vacuums. If you don't want people speculating wildly, you have to give them something to work with. Facts, updates, progress reports, anything that shows forward movement. 7 months in, the public knows almost nothing more than they knew on day one. Jack and Lily went into the woods. They didn't come out. The likelihood of survival is very low. Major crimes is involved, but it's not criminal. Daniel Martel maintains his innocence. That's it. That's the entire public knowledge base. Everything else is speculation, rumor, theory, or outright fiction created by people trying to fill the void. And maybe there are valid investigative reasons for that silence. Maybe revealing more would genuinely compromise whatever the RCMP is working on. But from the outside, it looks like stagnation. It looks like a case that's gone cold, but nobody wants to admit it. Let me tell you about the reporter's observation, because it captures something essential about this case. He said he never expected, going out that first day to cover a search for 2 missing children, to see it grow into what it's become. National attention, international coverage, a case study in how communities respond to tragedy, and how information vacuums create their own kind of crisis. What started as a local search and rescue operation became a cultural moment. Podcasts are probably covering it. YouTube videos are analyzing it. Reddit threads are theorizing about it. It's been absorbed into the true crime industrial complex, where tragedies become content, and missing children become mysteries to solve from the comfort of your couch. That's uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable, because Jack and Lily are real children with real families who are really suffering, and turning that suffering into entertainment feels morally dubious at best. But here's the complicated truth. That attention might be the only thing keeping the case alive. If people stop talking about it, if the media moves on completely, if the internet loses interest, then Jack and Lily become just another set of missing children that nobody remembers. The RCMP might deprioritize the case. Tips might stop coming in. The community might stop searching. So, which is worse? Treating tragedy as entertainment or letting tragedy fade into obscurity? There's no good answer. Just 2 bad options, and a family caught in the middle trying to find their children, while strangers debate theories on the internet. Now, let's talk about what happens next, because what happens next is a question everyone's asking and nobody can answer. In missing persons cases that go this long without resolution, there are really only a few possible outcomes. Remains are found. Someone hiking through those woods stumbles across evidence. Or a shift in terrain, erosion, flooding, wildlife activity, exposes something that was previously hidden. This is probably the most likely scenario statistically. If Jack and Lily died of exposure in those woods, they're still there somewhere. Eventually, they'll be found. New evidence emerges. A witness comes forward with information they didn't realize was relevant. Security footage is discovered that nobody knew existed. A person of interest makes a mistake. Something breaks the case open and provides the answer everyone's been waiting for. The case goes permanently cold. Years pass. The active investigation winds down. Jack and Lily remain missing with no resolution. The family lives the rest of their lives not knowing what happened. This is its own kind of hell. There's a breakthrough that changes everything. Jack and Lily are found alive, or evidence emerges that definitively explains what happened. The impossible becomes possible. Hope was justified. That last option is what everyone wants. It's also the least likely after 7 months of silence. But it's not impossible. And that's what makes this so cruel. It's not impossible. Just very, very unlikely. So the family waits. The community waits. The RCMP continues whatever investigation they're conducting. And life moves forward around a hole shaped like two missing children. Here's where this case intersects with something larger, our cultural relationship with missing children. We say, every missing child matters. We plaster faces on milk cartons and share Amber Alerts and donate to search efforts. We mean it sincerely. But we also know that some missing children get more attention than others. More resources, more media coverage, more public investment. Jack and Lily Sullivan got attention, massive attention, national headlines, international coverage, over 120 searchers that first weekend, helicopters and drones and military personnel, and major crimes involvement. Why? What made this case different from the dozens of other children who go missing every year in Canada? Part of it is circumstances, dense woods, no cell signal, the dramatic immediacy of it. Part of it is media coverage creating a feedback loop where attention generates more attention. Part of it is probably factors we don't want to examine too closely. Demographics, location, the specific details of the disappearance. But whatever the reason, Jack and Lily got resources that not every missing child gets. And they're still missing. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If all this attention and effort couldn't bring them home, what does that say about cases that don't get this level of response? It's not a comfortable thought, but it's worth thinking about. Let's talk about the emotional toll on the searchers, because they're victims in this too. The people who spent weeks in those woods searching for Jack and Lily, they're traumatized. Not in the same way as the family, but trauma nonetheless. Because when you search for missing children, you bond with them. You imagine finding them. You run scenarios in your head where you're the hero who calls out and gets a response. Where you look in the exact right place, and there they are, alive, waiting to be rescued. When that doesn't happen, when you search for weeks and find nothing, there's a specific kind of grief that comes with that. Failed hope, wasted effort. The constant question, did I miss something? Did I walk past them? Was I 10 feet away and didn't see them? That's going to stay with people. Years from now, those searchers are going to think about Jack and Lily. They're going to wonder. And they're going to carry some portion of this tragedy with them permanently. That's the ripple effect of cases like this. It's not just the immediate family that's destroyed. It's concentric circles of trauma expanding outward. Friends, extended family, neighbors, searchers, investigators, journalists covering it, even people on the internet following the case. They'll remember this. They'll think about Jack and Lily when they hear about other missing children. This case becomes part of their emotional landscape. Tragedy doesn't just affect the people at the center of it. It affects everyone who touches it. And a case like this touches thousands of people. Here's what I can't reconcile. The math. 8 days. That's how long the intensive search lasted before being scaled back. 8 days of over 100 people combing through 47 square kilometers of dense woodland. That's a lot of ground. That's a lot of eyes. That's a lot of hours and resources and effort. And they found nothing? Not a trace? Not a piece of clothing or a footprint or disturbed vegetation or anything that indicated Jack and Lily had been there. That's the detail that doesn't make sense. Because children don't vanish into thin air, even if they died of exposure on day one. There would be remains. There would be evidence. The woods are dense, yes. Visibility is poor, yes. But 120 people searching for 8 days should find something. Unless they weren't looking in the right place. Unless Jack and Lily didn't die in those woods. Unless something happened that we're not being told about. And that's where the conspiracy theories start. That's where the suspicion comes in. Because the official story, 2 children walk into the woods and disappear completely with no trace, doesn't quite make sense. There's a gap between what we're being told and what seems possible. Maybe that gap is just the limitation of information. Maybe the RCMP knows more than they're saying. Maybe there are investigative reasons for withholding that make perfect sense if we knew them. But from the outside, it looks like pieces are missing. And when pieces are missing from a story, People create their own pieces to fill the gaps. Let me be very clear about something. I don't know what happened to Jack and Lily Sullivan. Nobody outside the investigation knows. Anyone claiming to know is speculating. That includes everyone theorizing online, everyone in Facebook groups, everyone analyzing this case from their living room. What we have are facts and absences. The facts: Jack and Lily went into the woods. They didn't come out. Extensive searches found nothing. Major crimes is involved, but it's not criminal. The likelihood of survival is very low. Daniel Martel denies involvement. The absences: we don't know exactly when they went in. We don't know if they were alone. We don't know what they were doing. We don't know what evidence exists. We don't know why major crimes is involved. We don't know what the current focus of the investigation is. Those absences are where speculation lives. And speculation is dangerous because it masquerades as logic. If X is true, then Y must follow sounds reasonable. But if X isn't actually confirmed, then the entire chain of reasoning collapses. So when people say Daniel Martel must be involved because, or the RCMP is covering up something because, or Jack and Lily were obviously, they're building logical structures on foundations that don't exist. Maybe they're right. Maybe some of these theories will turn out to be accurate. But right now they're guesses. And treating guesses as facts does real harm to real people. Here's what we're left with 7 months later. 2 children are missing. A family is shattered. A community is traumatized. An investigation continues but has produced no public breakthroughs. The rest of us watch from the outside and wonder what happened, knowing we'll probably never know for certain. That's the reality of unsolved cases. They don't wrap up neatly. They don't provide closure. They just exist as open wounds that never quite heal. The Sullivan family is living with that wound every day. Every morning that starts with remembering. Every birthday celebrated without the birthday child. Every holiday with empty spaces at the table. Every time someone asks any news, and the answer is still no. 7 months, 210 days, 5,040 hours, and counting. Because the thing about missing persons cases is they never really end, not without resolution. The search might scale back. The media attention might fade. People might stop talking about it. But for the family, it never ends. The wondering never stops. The hoping against hope never quite dies. That's what Staff Sergeant Cameron meant when he said very low instead of impossible, because impossible ends it. Impossible lets you grieve and move on. Very low keeps you suspended in that horrible space between hope and despair where you can't fully do either. And maybe that's the most merciful approach. Maybe keeping hope alive, even when it's irrational, is kinder than forcing acceptance of a loss that can't be proven. Or maybe it's cruelty disguised as mercy, keeping families hoping when there's no realistic chance, preventing them from beginning the grieving process, trapping them in perpetual limbo. I don't know which it is. I don't think anyone does. Not even the experts who made the assessment, because there's no playbook for this. No right way to handle a case where children vanish completely with no evidence, no witnesses, no answers. You do your best. You search until it stops being productive to search. You investigate until leads dry up. You try to balance truth-telling with preserving hope. You make impossible decisions and live with the consequences. And somewhere Jack and Lily Sullivan are, where? Still in those woods, undiscovered? Somewhere else entirely? That's the question that haunts everyone involved. That's the question that will probably haunt them forever. Let me end with this, because it's what I keep coming back to. This case asks us to sit with uncertainty, to accept that sometimes we don't get answers. Sometimes tragedies happen and we never understand why or how. Sometimes children disappear and we never find them. That's uncomfortable. It violates our sense that the universe should make sense, that justice should exist, that children should be protected, that effort should be rewarded with results. But comfort isn't guaranteed. Sense isn't guaranteed. Justice isn't guaranteed. And sometimes, no matter how many people search or how hard they try, children stay missing. The Sullivan family has to live with that uncertainty. So does the Lancedone Station community. So do the searchers who spent weeks in those woods. So do the RCMP officers working the case. The rest of us have the luxury of moving on, of clicking to the next story, the next mystery, the next case. We can close this tab and forget about Jack and Lily until the next update comes, if it ever does. But for the people at the center of this, there is no moving on. There's only the perpetual present tense of missing, the constant not knowing, the hope that probably shouldn't exist but does anyway because the alternative, accepting that they're gone, is impossible to bear. So what happened to Jack and Lily Sullivan? I don't know. Nobody knows. And that's the tragedy. Not just that they're missing, though that's tragedy enough, but that we might never know. That this story might never have an ending. That years from now, people could still be asking the same question with no answer forthcoming. That's the reality of cold cases. They don't provide narrative satisfaction. They don't wrap up neatly. They just persist, unresolved, unanswered, unforgettable to those who lived through them, forgettable to everyone else. Where's the line between keeping hope alive and refusing to accept reality? When does searching become denial? When does investigation become futile? When do you stop looking for someone who doesn't want to be found, or can't be found, or isn't there to find? These are questions the Sullivan case forces us to confront, and they're questions that don't have comfortable answers. So I'm asking you, if you were Daniel Martel, how long would you keep searching? If you were the RCMP, at what point would you declare the case cold? If you were a community member, how would you maintain hope while acknowledging reality? Leave your honest answer below. Because this case isn't just about Jack and Lily Sullivan. It's about all of us. It's about how we respond to tragedy, how we balance hope with truth, how we live with uncertainty that can't be resolved. This case stays with me. The incompleteness of it, the missing pieces, the family that has to wake up every morning and remember that their children are somewhere, dead or alive, found or unfound, and they don't know where. If this moves you, if you understand why ambiguity is sometimes worse than the worst answer, hit like. Subscribe for cases that don't provide easy answers, but ask important questions about how we respond when the universe doesn't make sense. Because somewhere tonight, someone is going to bed not knowing where their loved one is, not knowing if they're alive or dead, not knowing if they'll ever know. And the not knowing is its own kind of death, a death of certainty, of closure, of the ability to move forward. That's what the Sullivan family is living with. That's what they'll continue living with until something breaks, until evidence emerges, until answers come. And if those answers never come, then they live with it forever, the permanent not knowing, the eternal maybe, the hope that can't quite die, and the grief that can't quite start. That's where this case leaves us. 7 months in, no resolution, no breakthrough. Just 2 missing children and a community that searched until they couldn't search anymore and still didn't find answers. Jack and Lily Sullivan walked into the woods behind Gearlock Road in Lancedone Station on a Friday morning. They never walked out. Everything else is speculation.